January 3, 1945. Versailles, France. The conference room fell silent as General Dwight Eisenhower delivered the order that would define Lieutenant General Jacob Devers' war. The 6th Army Group, comprising the American 7th Army and the French 1st Army, would withdraw from the Alsace region. Retreat. Abandon hard-won territory. Yield ground to the Germans. Devers, standing rigid beside the operations map, felt rage rise in his throat. This wasn't military necessity. This was political expediency. And it was wrong. "Sir, with respect, we can hold the Colmar pocket," Devers stated, his voice tight. "My men have fought for every meter of that ground. The French population will see this as abandonment." Eisenhower's face hardened. "The decision is made, Jake. We're consolidating the northern front. Your armies will pull back to the Vosges Mountains." Devers opened his mouth to protest, then caught the warning glance from General Omar Bradley. He was being told to comply. To accept. To obey without question. Everything in Jacob Devers' character rebelled against that obedience. But he was a soldier. So he saluted, turned on his heel, and walked out of the room carrying an order that would haunt him for the rest of his life. This moment, buried beneath the more celebrated dramas of Patton's dash across France and Montgomery's Market Garden disaster, crystallized a different kind of war story. Not the tale of a flamboyant commander or a controversial British field marshal, but the story of a quiet professional who delivered victory after victory, only to watch credit flow to others while blame landed on his shoulders. Jacob Devers, architect of the southern France invasion, liberator of Strasbourg, commander of the most ethnically diverse Allied army group, became the forgotten general. Not because he failed, but because he succeeded without the personality cult that defined his peers. The question that haunts military historians is simpler than it appears. How does a general who never lost a major battle, who accomplished every mission assigned to him, who demonstrated strategic vision and tactical competence repeatedly, vanish from the narrative of victory? The answer lies in the politics of coalition warfare, the machinery of military reputation, and the price one man paid for refusing to play the games that fame required. This is that story. April 12, 1944. London, England. Lieutenant General Jacob Devers sat in a borrowed office, reviewing intelligence reports on southern France when the summons arrived. General George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, wanted Devers to take command of the 6th Army Group and plan Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. The mission was clear. Land on the Mediterranean coast, drive north up the Rhone Valley, link up with Eisenhower's forces advancing from Normandy, and trap German armies between two Allied hammers. Devers understood immediately what the assignment meant. He would be commanding the secondary front, the supporting operation, the invasion that history would remember as an afterthought to the main event at Normandy. But Devers had spent his career executing missions others considered secondary. He'd commanded anti-aircraft artillery when it was seen as a backwater. He'd trained armored divisions when armor was untested. He'd served in North Africa under Eisenhower, watching the political theater that passed for high command. Now he would command an army group and prove that quiet competence could achieve what theatrical genius promised. The forces assigned to Devers reflected the mission's secondary status. The 7th Army under General Alexander Patch comprised solid but not elite divisions. The French 1st Army under General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny was still re-equipping after years of defeat and occupation. Devers would have adequate resources, but not the overwhelming strength given to Normandy. He would have competent staff, but not the brilliant planners clustered around Eisenhower. And he would have minimal attention from the Supreme Commander, who remained focused on the primary front in northern France. What Devers did have was freedom. Eisenhower, consumed by Normandy's complexities, gave Devers broad strategic guidance, then left him to plan independently. For a commander of Devers' temperament, this freedom was more valuable than additional divisions. He could design an operation without endless committee meetings. He could take calculated risks without seeking permission at every step. And he could prove that the U.S. Army had produced more than just Patton and Bradley. The plan Devers developed was characteristically professional. 3 divisions would land simultaneously along 45 miles of Mediterranean coast between Toulon and Caen. Airborne forces would secure inland positions, preventing German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Once the beachhead was secure, Allied forces would drive rapidly north, seizing the ports of Toulon and Marseille before German demolitions could render them unusable. Then the pursuit would begin, racing up the Rhone valley before Wehrmacht forces could establish coherent defensive lines. The plan worked flawlessly. On August 15, 1944, Operation Dragoon commenced with the assault landings achieving complete surprise. German resistance, expecting attacks further east, collapsed within hours. American forces pushed inland against minimal opposition while French troops, fighting to liberate their homeland, attacked Toulon and Marseille with ferocious determination. By August 28, both ports were in Allied hands, captured weeks ahead of schedule and with facilities largely intact. Devers' forces had accomplished in 2 weeks what planners had expected to take 2 months. The strategic impact was immediate. Marseille became the second-largest supply port supporting Allied operations in Europe, eventually delivering more tonnage than the Normandy beaches. The rapid advance up the Rhone valley threatened to trap German Army Group G against the Mediterranean or force its precipitous retreat. Within days of the landings, German commanders were ordering full-scale withdrawal northward, abandoning southern France to pursue survival. But the operational success brought Devers into collision with the command politics he had avoided throughout his career. Eisenhower, focused on the stalled breakout from Normandy, viewed Dragoon primarily as a source of reinforcements for his northern armies. In Eisenhower's conception, Devers' forces should advance rapidly until they made contact with Patton's Third Army, then transition to supporting roles, protecting Patton's southern flank while the more glamorous northern commanders pursued glory into Germany. Devers had different ideas. His intelligence staff, analyzing German dispositions, identified an opportunity that Eisenhower's headquarters seemed to be missing. The Wehrmacht forces retreating from southern France were disorganized, understrength, and vulnerable. If 6th Army Group maintained aggressive pursuit, it could trap significant German forces before they reached defensive positions in the Vosges Mountains. More importantly, Devers saw a route into Germany that others had overlooked. While attention focused on the Rhine crossings in the north, southern approaches through Alsace and the Belfort Gap offered potential for rapid advance into the German heartland. The problem was command attention. Eisenhower's headquarters remained fixated on Montgomery's operations in the north and Patton's dramatic dash across France. Devers' steady, professional advance lacked the drama that captured Supreme Headquarters' imagination. When Devers proposed aggressive operations to exploit German weakness, the responses from Eisenhower's staff were lukewarm. Resources were tight. Priorities lay elsewhere. 6th Army Group should continue its mission of protecting the southern flank. September 15, 1944. The Vosges Mountains, France. Devers stood on a hillside overlooking the German border, watching his armies press against the Westwall fortifications. In 3 weeks, 6th Army Group had advanced over 400 miles from the Mediterranean coast. They had liberated major French cities including Lyon and Dijon. They had captured over 100,000 German prisoners. And they had done it all while receiving a fraction of the supplies and attention lavished on armies to the north. Now they were on Germany's doorstep, and Devers believed they could break through before German defenses solidified. His operational concept was sound. Drive through the Belfort Gap, the traditional invasion route between the Vosges Mountains and the Swiss border. Once through the gap, will north toward Strasbourg and the Rhine. If successful, 6th Army Group would cross the Rhine before Montgomery in the north, potentially opening a direct route into southern Germany while German forces remained concentrated against anticipated attacks further north. The plan required aggressiveness, calculated risk, and willingness to operate on extended supply lines. It required, in other words, the kind of boldness that Patton received accolades for attempting. But when Devers presented the concept to Eisenhower's headquarters, the response was cautious to the point of dismissive. The Supreme Commander's planners worried about overextension. They questioned whether Devers' forces, including substantial French units, possessed the combat power to breach prepared German defenses. They suggested consolidation rather than attack, building up supplies before attempting major operations. The message was clear. Bold operations were acceptable when Patton proposed them. When Devers made similar suggestions, prudence was demanded. Devers recognized the double standard but lacked the political capital to overcome it. Patton had cultivated relationships with journalists, ensuring that Third Army's operations received extensive press coverage. Bradley, commanding 12th Army Group, enjoyed Eisenhower's complete confidence and trust. Montgomery, despite American frustrations with him, possessed Churchill's backing and British public adoration. Devers had only his record, and records apparently mattered less than personalities. Despite minimal encouragement from Supreme Headquarters, Devers pressed forward. On September 23, elements of the French 2nd Armored Division under General Philippe Leclerc, temporarily attached to 6th Army Group, approached Strasbourg. The city carried immense symbolic importance for France, having been ceded to Germany after the Franco-Prussian War and reclaimed after World War I only to fall again in 1940. Its liberation would resonate throughout France and demonstrate Allied momentum toward Germany proper. But Eisenhower's headquarters intervened. Leclerc's division was ordered north to join the 1st French Army under de Lattre de Tassigny rather than pushing into Strasbourg immediately. The decision made administrative sense, consolidating French forces under single command. But it denied Devers the opportunity for a symbolic victory that might have elevated 6th Army Group's profile. Once again, operational logic served to diminish Devers' achievements while channeling glory elsewhere. November 23, 1944. Strasbourg, France. After weeks of hard fighting through the Vosges Mountains, the French 2nd Armored Division finally entered Strasbourg. The liberation sparked celebrations throughout France. For General de Lattre and the French soldiers, the moment represented national redemption. For Devers, commanding the army group that had made the liberation possible, it represented vindication of his aggressive operational approach. 6th Army Group had reached the Rhine despite minimal support from higher headquarters. They had penetrated the west wall defenses that intelligence had deemed formidable. And they had done it all while fighting in terrain that favored defense and during weather that grounded air support for days at a time. The achievement should have been celebrated. Instead, it became a problem. Strasbourg's position on the west bank of the Rhine created a salient into German-held territory. Worse, German forces retained control of the Colmar Pocket, a bridgehead west of the Rhine south of Strasbourg. In Eisenhower's assessment, 6th Army Group had advanced too far, too fast, creating vulnerable positions that would require resources to defend. Resources that Eisenhower wanted allocated to operations in the north. The critique was militarily defensible but strategically myopic. Yes, Strasbourg created a salient. But it also placed Allied forces on the Rhine weeks ahead of schedule and demonstrated German defensive weakness in the south. The Colmar Pocket was problematic, but it represented a surrounded and isolated force rather than a genuine threat to Allied operations. A competent operational commander could exploit the situation. But exploitation required confidence in subordinate commanders. And Eisenhower's confidence flowed to Bradley and Patton, not to the quiet professional in the south. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. When German forces launched their surprise offensive through the Ardennes, triggering the Battle of the Bulge, the crisis dominated Allied attention. Eisenhower, scrambling to contain the German breakthrough, began shifting resources northward to reinforce threatened sectors. For 6th Army Group, holding positions in Alsace with minimal reserves, the reallocation meant accepting increased risk along an already thinly held front. On January 1, 1945, the Germans launched Operation Nordwind, attacking 6th Army Group's positions in northern Alsace. The offensive, while smaller than the Ardennes attack, achieved tactical surprise and threatened to unhinge Allied positions in the region. Devers responded with characteristic competence, shifting forces to contain the German advance while maintaining pressure elsewhere along his front. His handling of the crisis was professional and effective, preventing German breakthrough while avoiding the dramatic reverses that had characterized the war's early American battles. But the combination of the Bulge crisis and Nordwind convinced Eisenhower that 6th Army Group was overextended. On January 3, he ordered Devers to withdraw from Alsace, abandoning Strasbourg and pulling back to more defensible positions in the Vosges Mountains. The order was militarily logical from Eisenhower's perspective. It would shorten Allied lines, free up reserves for deployment elsewhere, and reduce risk in a secondary theater. But it ignored political and psychological realities that would haunt the decision. Strasbourg's abandonment would devastate French morale. The city had been liberated barely 6 weeks earlier amid national celebration. Its surrender to German reoccupation would suggest that Allied commitment to France was conditional, subject to withdrawal whenever military convenience demanded. More immediately, tens of thousands of Alsatian civilians who had welcomed Allied liberation faced German retaliation if Wehrmacht forces returned. The order was not just militarily questionable. It was politically catastrophic. Devers understood this instantly. He also understood that arguing with Eisenhower in the midst of the Bulge crisis would be fruitless. The Supreme Commander, under enormous pressure from the German offensive in Belgium, was in no mood for debate about secondary theaters. So Devers did what he had done throughout his career. He complied outwardly while seeking alternative solutions. The solution came from an unexpected direction. General Charles de Gaulle, learning of the planned withdrawal, threatened to remove French forces from Allied command and defend Strasbourg independently. The threat was not idle posturing. French units, fighting to liberate their homeland, would disobey orders to abandon French civilians to German revenge. De Gaulle made clear that French national honor could not survive Strasbourg's surrender without resistance. Churchill, alarmed by the potential collapse of Allied unity, intervened with Eisenhower. The Prime Minister argued that political considerations must temper military logic. Strasbourg's abandonment would undermine French confidence in the Anglo-American alliance and potentially trigger governmental crisis in Paris. The risk was not worth the modest operational benefits of shortened lines. Under combined political pressure from Churchill and de Gaulle, Eisenhower reversed his order. 6th Army Group would hold Strasbourg. The reversal vindicated Devers' operational judgment. He had argued from the beginning that Strasbourg could be defended, that withdrawal was unnecessary, that 6th Army Group possessed the combat power to contain German attacks while maintaining key positions. But the vindication came at a cost. Eisenhower blamed Devers for the political firestorm, suggesting that Devers should have handled French concerns more effectively. The criticism was absurd. Devers was an operational commander, not a diplomat. Managing French political sensitivities was properly the responsibility of Supreme Headquarters. But Eisenhower needed a scapegoat for a bad decision, and Devers was conveniently available. February 9, 1945. Colmar, France. After weeks of grinding combat in winter conditions, 6th Army Group finally eliminated the Colmar pocket. German forces, trapped west of the Rhine, had resisted with characteristic German stubbornness. But French determination to liberate their territory and American firepower proved overwhelming. The pocket's elimination removed the last German bridgehead west of the Rhine in the 6th Army Group sector. Devers' forces now controlled the entire west bank of the river in Alsace and stood poised to cross into Germany proper. The Colmar victory received minimal attention from Supreme Headquarters or from the press corps focused on more dramatic operations to the north. But the achievement was significant. 6th Army Group had defended Strasbourg against German counterattack, eliminated the Colmar pocket, and positioned itself for Rhine crossings, all while receiving a fraction of the supplies and reinforcements allocated to armies in the north. Devers had accomplished his mission despite, rather than because of, support from higher headquarters. March 15, 1945. Devers received authorization to begin planning Rhine crossing operations. The guidance from Eisenhower's headquarters emphasized caution. Sixth Army Group should cross only after Montgomery's elaborate set-piece crossing operation in the north succeeded. The message was familiar. Even in victory's final phase, Devers' armies would play supporting roles while others claimed the glory of decisive operations. But German defenses in the south were collapsing faster than intelligence estimates predicted. On March 15, the same day Devers received his cautious guidance, elements of the 15 Corps discovered that German forces had abandoned defensive positions near Worms. The Rhine was undefended. Devers faced a decision that defined his approach to command. He could follow guidance and wait for Montgomery's crossing. Or he could exploit opportunity and cross immediately, seizing a bridgehead before German commanders could react. Devers ordered the immediate crossing. Within hours, American troops were across the Rhine, establishing a bridgehead with minimal casualties. It was the first Allied crossing of the Rhine south of Montgomery's sector, achieved with a fraction of the resources and none of the elaborate preparation that characterized Montgomery's operation. Sixth Army Group had beaten Montgomery across the Rhine, demonstrating again that aggressive execution could achieve what methodical preparation promised. Supreme Headquarters' reaction was muted. Congratulations were perfunctory. Press coverage was minimal compared to the saturation reporting of Montgomery's crossing days later. Devers had achieved a significant operational success and received a footnote in dispatches. For a commander less secure in his professional identity, the slight would have been crushing. Devers simply noted it and continued the advance. April 1945. Germany. As Allied armies converged on Germany from all directions, Sixth Army Group drove into southern Germany and Austria. French forces liberated Stuttgart and pushed toward the Swiss border. American units advanced toward Munich and the Austrian Alps. Throughout the advance, Sixth Army Group maintained operational momentum, covering ground rapidly while accepting German surrenders by the tens of thousands. But even in victory's final weeks, politics intruded. Eisenhower, concerned about Soviet advance into Central Europe, shifted priorities toward linking up with Soviet forces and preventing German attempts to establish an Alpine redoubt. In this conception, Sixth Army Group's role was to secure southern Germany and Austria, ensuring that no Nazi remnants could establish resistance centers in the mountains. It was important work, but it lacked the drama of Berlin's fall or the symbolism of meeting Soviet armies at the Elbe River. May 7, 1945. Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Sixth Army Group had advanced from the Mediterranean coast to the Austrian Alps in 9 months of continuous operations. They had liberated major portions of France, breached the West Wall, crossed the Rhine, and occupied southern Germany. They had captured hundreds of thousands of prisoners, destroyed multiple German divisions, and accomplished every mission assigned to them. And they had done it all with less support, fewer resources, and minimal recognition compared to armies commanded by more celebrated generals. Devers' performance review from Eisenhower was lukewarm. The Supreme Commander praised Devers' operational competence while noting concerns about his willingness to take risks without proper authorization. The critique was revealing. When Patton took unauthorized risks, he was boldly aggressive. When Devers exploited opportunities without seeking permission, he was insubordinate. The double standard reflected the politics of reputation. Patton could afford controversy because his legend protected him. Devers, lacking legend, could afford nothing. Post-war, Jacob Devers returned to the United States and continued his Army career without drama or headlines. He commanded Army ground forces, served in senior training positions, and retired as a full general. His memoirs, when finally published, were characteristically understated, focusing on operational lessons rather than personal grievances. He attended reunions, gave occasional interviews, and watched as historians wrote accounts of the war that marginalized his contributions. The question of why Devers disappeared from popular memory has multiple answers, none entirely satisfying. He lacked Patton's theatrical personality and quotable outrageousness. He lacked Montgomery's genius for self-promotion and political maneuvering. He lacked Bradley's proximity to Eisenhower and the institutional blessing that relationship provided. What he possessed was competence, professionalism, and quiet effectiveness. And in the machinery of military reputation, those qualities prove insufficient without the performance art that fame requires. But there is a deeper answer, one that cuts to coalition warfare's essential nature. Devers commanded forces that included substantial French units. His army group was ethnically diverse, politically complex, and difficult to fit into simple narratives about American military prowess. Celebrating Devers meant acknowledging French contributions, complicating stories about American power winning the war. It meant recognizing that some of the war's most effective operations happened away from spotlight and drama. And it meant confronting the uncomfortable reality that the generals who played politics best were not always the generals who fought best. Jacob Devers died in 1979, largely forgotten outside military history circles. No major biography appeared during his lifetime. No Hollywood film celebrated his achievements. The 6th Army Group's liberation of southern France and drive into Germany remained a footnote in histories focused on Normandy and the race to Berlin. For the soldiers who served under Devers, the neglect was bitter. They had fought as hard, advanced as far, and achieved as much as any Allied forces. But their story lacked the marketable personalities that bestsellers required. The final assessment belongs to military historians who, decades later, began re-evaluating Devers' record. What they found was a commander whose operational judgment was consistently sound, whose handling of coalition forces was exemplary, and whose achievements compared favorably with more celebrated peers. Devers never lost a major battle. He never suffered the kind of operational disasters that marked Patton's career or the strategic miscalculations that characterized Montgomery's record. He succeeded in missions others considered secondary, proving that competence without charisma could achieve victory even if it could not achieve recognition. In the final accounting, Jacob Devers represents something American military culture struggles to celebrate: the quiet professional. The officer who executes missions without demanding headlines. The commander who achieves objectives without theatrical gestures. The general who measures success by results rather than reputation. These qualities won battles in 1944 and 1945. But they could not win the peacetime struggle for historical memory. And so Devers faded, not because he failed, but because he succeeded in ways that made better history than headlines. His story is not of a commander who demanded to be noticed. It is of a soldier who did his duty while others claimed the glory. And perhaps that is the most military story of all.